Hey, I'm Chris Gilchrist. I get to serve as the executive pastor here at Stonebridge Church in the Woodlands. Welcome to Sunday Continued. This is where we keep the conversation going after Sunday, asking the questions we didn't get to, talking through what this actually looks like in real life, and figuring out how to live it out during the week. If you're new to Stonebridge or just exploring, we're so glad that you're here. Our heart is simple. It's to lead people to a real, healthy, and growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And if you're local to the Woodlands or Magnolia, we'd love to meet you sometime. We gather every Sunday at 9:30 and 11:05. Now let's dive in.
Well, this past week, we were in Acts 5, and I really appreciated, Steve, that you ended with a direct assault against my job of goal setting. And so you essentially told the congregation that we should have no goals.
That. Yes.
And I felt attacked in my role.
Okay.
I helped set goals for the church.
But
and
I didn't
just like,
mention your name. I just...
No, it's even worse, though.
Okay,
get no credit for the goals.
That's better.
But talk a little bit what you meant by that, so maybe I'm a little less offended by you.
Yeah, so one of the things that kind of jumped out to me is because we are a culture obsessed, I think, with planning and goals. And of course, like I said, nothing wrong with planning and goals. You should make plans.
Yeah, but then you kind of said it's not so great.
But the early church had none of those things.
No.
The early church had just that one thing, and that was faith. They believed who Jesus was, what he had done. They trusted that. And then it just sort of unfolded as they went. And as much as we may not like to admit it or kind of tie into it, our lives do the same thing.
Absolutely.
And we think, or we like to think, that we can set the course, plan out the steps, all of those things, but it just doesn't work that way because there's so many turns and twists and all. And for them, I think what's really remarkable is they were kind of in that spot where they realized the twists and the turns, that there was someone behind those, and he was doing that. And they were like, even when they get beaten, flogged, they're like,
rejoicing
man,
afterwards.
this is great, isn't it? And I don't think it was because of the pain that they're rejoicing and thinking, that really felt good. I think it's because of the idea that whatever came, they knew that he had plans and he was leading them, and they were just going to try to go with those as best they could, even though they had a general idea, because he had said Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, ends of the earth. But
but they didn't have any formal plan at this point.
No.
Like, you can even just see it in the way in which, even in the course of Scripture, and even where we're going next week with Acts 6, of like, they start needing to have a little bit of formation. But like, to your point of, when I look at my life and I look at the times I've gotten it wrong, a lot of the times it's because I've set goals without including my relationship with Jesus in them.
Yeah.
And I think that was one of the things that I liked about where you went with that at the end, of this understanding of, we so often as people and as humans, we love to set our own goals and tell God, like, hey, you can come along for the ride if you want to, but like, here's where Chris wants to dictate things, and here's where I want to go, and how unhappy that can make me a lot of times, when my goals are on my own merit and my own trying to do, and just the concept of like slowing down enough to be like, in my making of plans, am I including God in this?
Right. And I think and James, I guess, talks about that too.
Mm-hmm.
We shouldn't just say, tomorrow we'll go do this and that, but if the Lord wills. And I don't think it's a way of speaking. I think it's a way of thinking is what he's actually talking about. But if you think about it, as they do this, a lot of times what happens is we make our plans, we go that direction. I had a friend one time that told me, the one thing worse than having plans or having goals and not attaining them is attaining them. Because then you find out that was it. That was all. What was, where did this lead, or where was this supposed to have led to? And it's disappointing. And that was part of his story in his life of going after his goals. And I think they realized, of course, there was a destination, there was something more happening, and that God would lead and he would take them to the next step and the next step, even though, just like you said, I don't think they had a real clue about what that meant, even though, it had been sort of laid out, because they're probably content just to sit there in Jerusalem forever.
Well, I think that's what they, up until other things happen, I think that was all they kind of thought was that God has called us to this group of people, and we're going to do our best to minister to the people here, because they didn't know when they were supposed to scatter and spread. They were just like, all right, he told us Jerusalem, so we're going to stay in Jerusalem, and that's kind of what we're doing right here. And so I think for them, it's just like we are just being faithful to what God has called us to right here and right now.
Yeah.
And I think for me, just, looking at my own life of, what has God called me to? And like, what is he calling us to? And I love how you talked about just the ripple effects of, we talked about it a lot in our staff meeting today, of just what are the things that we're doing in our day in and day out that we don't know that's going to cause a ripple effect for the future.
Right.
And what are the things that we're doing in people's lives that we are unaware of, but God has called us to, and we just need to walk in the freedom of them, knowing that, well, God has called us to it. We don't really know the plan for it. We don't know the plan for the people's lives that I'm in, but I do know that God's called me to them.
Yeah. We're doing in my small group, we're looking at the verses in Corinthians where he says, but take all thoughts captive to Christ in your thinking. And I think a lot of that has to do with direction also. Everything you think you might want to do, whatever, but how does that fit into his plan for you? Because it's such a better plan. It has a destination. It has a guarantee to it, even though it doesn't feel like it as you're moving forward. Because we tend to, as we talked about today, we tend to want to set goals. Did we hit that mark? Did we get there? And that can be a misleading kind of system so many times, because you can get there, hit those marks, and then find out, okay, and
what is this all for?
Yeah.
Well, even with taking every thought captive, how easy, you and I talked about this a lot today, of how easy it is to make that about taking every thought captive so that my life is better. Like when Paul's talking about that, I don't think that was his intention.
No,
I don't think he
so
wrote it so that you would be like, well, I'm going to take every thought captive so that I become super successful and I have all of these great things. I think he wrote it because he wants you to take every thought captive and, once again, align it with what God wants for your life.
Right. Because it's much better plan. And the early apostles and the believers and those who are following, and now, at one point he's already mentioned 5,000 men who are believing is growing. So the ripples, as you mentioned, are, in one sense, they're getting bigger, which is strange, because usually when something hits the water, the ripples go and then they die off. But in this case, they're not dying off. And again, I think that's part of the energy and what they're saying, because like we just said, to be able to rejoice that you suffer, for the name of Jesus, which is what they said that they did, doesn't make any sense unless you see this as something that is not dying, but it's growing, it's moving forward, and it's changing. And that's, that's going to go into what you are going to talk about, which is the changes that do occur because the size, you got to take care of things, you have to organize, people have to take on different jobs and different responsibilities as God has equipped them and prepared them for, even though they didn't know it, in order to meet the needs of the group and to continue to move forward.
And it's us finding our gifting, right? Like where has God called you into the story at your church, and where you belong? Because that's where the church starts going, right? Of like the next part, we see the setting up of these ministers to take care of widows and trying to make sure that they're well taken care of. And I think, like when I look at, where the apostles were and what they were doing, and then now you see these other things starting to form, I think it begs the question in today's current church and in our church at Stonebridge of, where do you find your place? Like, how can I become a part of the ripple effect in other people's stories?
Right.
And I think that's, one of the things you and I get to encourage people on all the time of, you get to now join in and find your place into other people's story now too.
Right.
And that might be different for everybody. It might be serving widows. It might be joining the care team. It might be welcoming people. It could be so many things.
And in their story, it's kind of worked that way. they have to do these things because the needs are there. So you jump in and you try to meet those needs or find some sort of solution or answer to the problems. It's not that the answer's perfect,
No, yeah.
or we're going to
I hope
fix it
not.
and it will never happen again. It's just that you are there and you're a part of it, and God has put you there with this opportunity. I think so many people just miss the opportunities that are right in front of them because they do have goals and plans and projections, and sometimes they're looking for those and they're just missing what is there that God is going to use to shape them.
I think in our culture too, like we tend to just overthink things,
Right?
Or we start thinking this problem is too big for me to even get involved in. I mean, I think that's one of the cool things about our food pantry, right? Is how it was started was people in our church looking at the needs of the community around us and going, we want to do something. And I just think, from there to what it is now was just the boldness of just starting with that first step of, I see a need and I'm going out and saying, I need to do something about this.
And they did have to plan, and they did have to set goals in a sense and move forward in doing that. But it really
started with a need, though.
It did. It started with faith.
Yeah.
Because they just trusted that if they moved into this and did this, where would it lead? Not sure, but that it was a worthwhile thing to do.
And I've never asked Tiffany this, but I'd be curious of if she could go back in time and say, where did I see this going? I bet it doesn't look exactly like it does now because things morph and change and your plans change. But the addressing of the need and where God put something on your heart, that's still being addressed in that moment. And I think, too, of Nancy Costello with Young Lives, of, once again, this person in our church that sees the need of these pregnant teen moms in our area and approaches us and just like, I want to do something. Can we as a church rally alongside them? And now we've got over 40 people at our church volunteering with that ministry.
And I think if we'll be sincere with God and again ask Him, how can you use me? I think then you'll see all around you opportunities for God to use you in someone's life, and make an impact somehow. Give a different word for them and a different feel for their lives because you cared and you got involved with them. And of course, it changes us when all those things happen also.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I think for me, it's just, do I ever slow down enough to see it? Because I think that's what we run into so much with our culture of just the high pace and just the constant movement that we have of, it's really easy in our speed to miss people. It's really easy to get maybe even numb to the needs around us because maybe they do feel so vast and so big that you're like, how do I make a difference in this? And I do, back to our point of just, if you just slow down and say, God, where can you use me?
Yeah.
Pretty often, and I would say most of the time, I see God showing people where they can be used.
Right.
It might take a little time and it might take a little bit of working out and trying to figure out exactly what that might be, but God's pretty faithful if you have a willing heart to use you.
And, one of the things that happened in the story, because Brian brought this up too, is as they're moving forward, they don't know how it's going to work and how God is going to move them, direct them, deliver them from their struggles and all too. And then that name Gamaliel pops up. And so Gamaliel is one of the other side. He's one of the Pharisees, one of the religious leaders. And yet God uses him to make a difference in the outcome of the meeting that occurred.
Yeah.
And I think that has to be part of the rejoicing that they saw too, because they couldn't have orchestrated this or
no, he was
put
someone
him in that place.
He was someone on the other side.
Right.
He was technically in opposition to what they're doing. And he even kind of says that, but then he has enough fear of the Lord to be like, hey, if God's in this, maybe we should stop. Like maybe we shouldn't get involved in these guys' lives. But I do think that is, for them, for the apostles to just see God clearly at hand in the movement of that.
And what you see is God has prepared ahead of time. So he knew what was coming. And so, it's not a foreign thing to him when any circumstance or situation arises. I think there's one place, I think it may be, I'm trying to think, it's one in Paul's letters where he says, don't think it a strange thing that you have these difficulties and these
Oh, yeah.
problems and these struggles that occur, because that's the way life works. And in one way, that plays into God's hands, because they're not strange to him and they're not unplanned to him, but he works in the midst of them and uses them, as I think, we often discover, because a lot of times, I look back at the hardships or problems or difficulties that I've gone through, even difficult people, and then I look back and realize, well, actually God used that to shape me and to remind me and to build something into me that otherwise would not have been there. And now I would never have picked it that way.
No,
but
that's never. I mean, I imagine. Well, even they were rejoicing after being flogged, and after
Right.
they were rejoicing after going to prison. Bet if I could ask them still, they'd be like, I maybe wouldn't have chosen prison.
yeah, I wouldn't pick that if it was still my option. I wouldn't pick it. But and that is part of that faith, that trust, that whatever I go through, whatever I face, God will be there. As David says in Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd. So he's the one leading and guiding and picking where we're going to go and what's going to happen. And I think it's an exciting thing for them as they go through it. And one day, you when you get to the destination, to the end, it's even more exciting.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that's one of the encouragement of Acts to me, is that you see over and over again that God is not wasting their suffering.
right.
And God's not wasting these, from what our sense, these terrible things happening to them. I mean, what they're going through is not good, and on a human nature, you don't want to go to prison. You don't want to get flogged.
Right.
And their perspective is just so different the entire time. Of they're seeing God in the midst of what's going on. And for me, that just gives me, encouragement and a pause to be asked the same question.
Right.
Of when I'm going through a trial, or I'm going through something that's difficult or something that is unpleasant, how can I still see God in the midst of it?
Right.
And then maybe even a step further of how can I use my current sufferings and trials and tribulations to glorify God and to bring him glory, even though what I'm dealing with is not in any way ideal. And I think you see that in their lives. You see it over and over again, of them taking something that you would look at and go, gosh, that seems awful, and then using that to spread the gospel.
Yeah. And as far as our lives are concerned, and the people that we know and that we get a chance to encounter, we tend to think, if I could only plan it out, I would plan it out. Of course, most of the time we're planning it out based on something we've read, a show we've watched, something, and when we have this idea. But if we really planned it out, it would have drama to it, and it would have hardship and difficulties, and then you overcome, which is exactly what God does. It's
what makes a good
we
story.
we don't pick that path because it wouldn't seem to make any sense to pick that path, because we would say, I can't pick that path because I don't know how it's going to turn out, how it's going to work. Well, he does.
Yeah.
And when he moves us, he does know where it's going to end.
And let's, when you even look at Romans 8, that we know that God's going to work all things to good.
Together for good. Yeah.
And it's just, what an encouragement for us as believers that we know that God's going to do that.
Right.
And it might not be like you said, it might not be how I mapped it. It most likely won't be.
Right.
When I have tried to map it, God quickly changes it for the most part for me. And like we said, it's not about the goals, but it's about my alignment with his will and what he's trying to do.
Yeah, and one of the things I like about where you're going to go next in this too.
Well, only if I go there. But
Yeah,
we'll
if you
see.
go there, is the fact that it really is just one step that's going to lead to another step and another step. And is it going to continue to change? It is going to continue to change, and there's still going to be high drama ahead, and there's going to be energy ahead, and there's going to be movement ahead. But that is how God works in our lives, and how God uses us as He works in the world. And here we are 2,000 years later, and we still see the same types of workings as we were talking about earlier. When you see someone's heart change, and you see a change that occurs in their life, and you realize that this is God working in their heart and in their life, it just reminds you again that He is still moving forward and still uses us in those situations with other people also.
Well, and there's this, I've talked about church statistics all the time, and
Right.
there was this growing belief for a lot of years of, well, the church is dying and it's not going to keep growing, and that's just not true. Like
No.
the church is growing, and even still for us, we've talked about it before of just the revival or just the excitement that is in the younger generation of Gen Z and even younger in our country right now of just them coming back to Jesus and wanting to know who he is, and
Yeah.
just the encouragement that is. And it goes back to, that concept of this ripple effect of 2,000 years later, see where the church has come now.
Yeah.
And sure, there's a lot of things that you can maybe dwell on that's negative about it, but the amount of people that have come to know Christ over this 2,000 years and the lives changed and the stories that have been told is such an encouragement. And to see it still moving forward and still growing is, I think, something to be really excited about.
I agree, and it is to me too. And to think that we get a chance to be a part of that story and that movement in Hebrews, it talks about that that those who were given promises, then they died, and the promises were not all fulfilled in
Sure.
them,
Yeah.
and that it will not be without us. And of course, we will say the same things to those who come after us also, that we're all a part of it and somehow a part of the completion, of that story.
Yeah.
One day. So,
And we're all getting this opportunity to join into people's stories.
yeah.
And that would be my encouragement for anyone of this week of when you see where we've been in Acts of, and if you haven't stepped into the life of a church, whether it's ours or somebody else's, or in the life of other people around you, like look at the story of Acts and get excited about that and jump into somebody's life and jump into the life of a church, because there's stuff happening. And even if it's something behind the scenes, like even if you're like, I think the most behind the scenes thing that we have maybe on a Sunday is someone working a camera. Man, you're having the opportunity to work a camera that then is projected out into the world. And I don't know how any of that works, but the internet is crazy, and people in our area get to see the message of the gospel from working a camera.
Right.
And just all the cool ways that you might not think that you're involved in God's story.
Right.
But you absolutely can be with the gifts that you have and the skills that you have.
All right.
All right.